Yo guys! It's your friend here, bringing you another awesome Naruto what if tale. What if Naruto got a legendary harem with Mikoto? Naruto what if stories in complete comfort. A subscription to Naruto Lemon. The first video with a full lemon is already on my Boosty channel. Music, Dare the Night Kavir. D. Koha with a blanket of darkness with the lights of stars flickering dimly from its depths. The night luminaries seemed to be watching the village plunged into sleep. The windows of the houses had long gone dark. The streets were completely empty. Only lonely lanterns scattered light along the deserted alleys. Although all the residents fell asleep to gain strength for the coming day, life in the Hidden Leaf village continued even at night, but not for people but for the shadows cast by the branches of swaying trees that danced along the ground, sometimes intertwining with each other and then again scattering in different directions. Only one boy had a chance to see this mysterious world of shadows, who appeared from the darkness of the night in the light of a friendly blinking lantern and just as quickly disappeared from it again, diving into the darkness and running on. The boy would be happy to leap in his crib now like everyone else. He loved this business too much, but now he had no time to sleep. He had a mission to complete, not one of those missions that shinobi carried out on behalf of the Hokage. Our hero was still too young for such achievements. He had barely begun to study at the arcade. Where did the mission come from then, you ask? The answer may surprise you a little. I still think this is a stupid idea, Kurama, the boy muttered as he climbed the outer stairs that encircled the tower-like building and opened the door, which at the same time let out a piercing creak that made the Kai-LD flinch. He ducked inside, surprised that the Hokage residence was not locked. The third Hokage left her at 10 in the evening. Going home, did he forget to close the door behind him? Anyone can sneak into his office and gain access to top-secret documents. It seems that fate itself favors you today. The old Sile forgot to lock the door. The voice of the nine-tailed fox sounded in Nutke, head rolling like thunder. Cu was silent for a few seconds and responded to the blonde boy's previous remark. Dumb, I could have come up with something myself instead of whining about my worthlessness at ninjutsu and jin jutsu. Naruto closed the door behind him and looked thoughtfully at the curved corridor leading to the third's office. Pulling a flashlight from his pocket and turning it on, he slowly moved forward, trying to be as silent as possible. Although there was no one in the residence building, sneaking past the entrance to the office, since the aforementioned secret documents did not interest him in any way. Naruto moved on, stopping for a moment in front of the spiral staircase leading down into the library. Well, I'll find some scroll. What next? I still won't succeed. Data Bo, he whispered doubtfully. Kurama's response was quite harsh. No, idiot, this library contains not ordinary scrolls but scrolls of the Uzumaki clan with techniques that are in your blood. The Uzumaki shrugged. Well, if you think so, he muttered, and lighting his way with a flashlight began to descend the stairs. The third's library occupied several levels. Now Naruto understood why the Hawk's office was located on the top floor. Underneath it was a whole library of knowledge, starting from historical books and ending with scrolls with mysterious techniques that interested the boy so much he walked past the bookshelves, lighting his way with a flashlight and peering at the titles on the spines of the books. Go down lower, advised the Ninal. The Uzumaki Abed, and went down to the lowest floor, which compared to the other tidy levels of the library was in complete chaos. There were cabinets with some kind of bottles near the walls. Strange instruments blocked the passage. A bunch of dusty stacks of papers and scrolls littered the chaotically arranged tables and in some places even the floor, taking advantage of the fact that cleaning is rarely done here. Hardworking spiders entangled everything around with a web through which our hero had to wade through. Apparently the old man doesn't come here often, the Genu Riki noted, coughing. His student Orochimaru, who left the village before you were born, once worked in this place, Kurama explained. I remember he was also interested in all sorts of scrolls, and your mother didn't like him at all, I think. The old man still blames himself for Orochimaru becoming a renegade, which is why he rarely turned here. The Gentry nodded briefly, directing a beam of light to the farthest corner where a deck of cards lay on the edge of the table. He came closer, curiously took one card and, pointing a flashlight at It saw a man in bright clothes in a stupid hat and with an equally stupid smile on his painted face. Sometimes Naruto smiled the same way when he didn't know the answer to a question asked by Ira Joker. Kurorama commented, "It seems that this is the same deck of cards that marked the beginning of a series of failures for the second student Tsunade. Her first big money loss, the Nine Tails, was lost in memories while Naruto thoughtfully looked at the pictures on the other cards. Finally he took the entire deck from the table and put it in his pocket. You know the rules of this game, right?" the blonde asked the fox. "Of course," he responded, "but I think it's too early for you to play poker. It would be better to train more." Actually, returning to why we came here, Uzumaki glanced at the scroll that had fallen from this table and bending down picked it up, unrolling it and blowing off the dust. Naruto quick L.Y. glanced over the text and pictures that someone had carefully provided for clarity. Mito's handwriting. Kurorama growled, "Congratulations, this is a scroll with techniques of the Uzumaki clan. Come on, read it out loud." Naruto read everything that was written in the old scroll, although some of the words were unfamiliar to him and seemed difficult. "Kurorama, what is Fuinjutsu?" he frowned. "Sealing techniques like the one that sealed me into you. And what did they teach you fools at the academy?" QB grumbled. "Curious, sealing techniques is a very useful ability. You'll need it." Naruto looked at the text and pictures and sighed. "Too many of these what's their name hand seals." The fox finished for him, knowing that Naruto was not very strong in this area. "Yes, to seal the technique you need to make some effort, but it says that you can then use it an unlimited number of times just by adding a seal of concentratio. No, that's another matter." Naruto was inspired. "But what can you seal? Equipment in anything, at least to your cards," Kurorama said with a hint of irritation in his voice. Sometimes he thought Naruto was too stupid, at least compared to Mio and Kusha, who were his previous grade. But in order to seal a Tekken IQ, you must first find the technique somewhere." Naruto continued, frowning again. He rolled up the scroll, putting it back in its place, and began rummaging through the bookcase. "I like the way you think," the fox responded mockingly. What Naruto found was almost impossible to read. The handwriting was too clumsy. It was immediately clear that these scrolls were not the work of Mito Uzumaki but of someone else, apparently Orochimaru. Completely tired, he pulled out a book from the top shelf, opened it to a randomly selected page and quickly skimming the instructions nodded, convincing himself that he understood everything. He pulled one card out of his pocket, placed it in front of him and began to make seals slowly and remembering as he went exactly what movements to make. First there was a combination that created a technique and then a combination that sealed it in the card and prevented the jutsu from immediately spilling out. What already? Kurorama was surprised. "I thought it would take longer." Suddenly a rustling sound made Naruto flinch. He grabbed a card with a technique sealed in it from the table and took to his heels, quickly running up the stairs. The Uzumaki was just now realizing how angry he would be if he found out where he was and what he was doing. "Calm down, it was just a rat," the fox grinned as Naruto rushed down the street, choosing not the shortest path to the house. "It was a stupid idea," Kurorama muttered. Uzumaki without slowing down. He slowed down only when he was completely exhausted. Confident that the danger was behind him, he was able to catch his breath a little. "Where are we? It seems Sasuke lives nearby," the boy muttered, looking around. He had never been in this part of the village at night, so he had trouble getting his bearings. Uzumaki walked further at random, thinking that sooner or later he would find a landmark from which he could get to home, the same house of Sasuke, for example. Iha Sas. This boy should have been mentioned, the object of attention of all the girls at the academy, the best student in the class and also a person with a very inflated ego. Naruto didn't like the Iha, although in some ways he envied him. Sasuke was a talented child, not like him, not the son of the fourth Hokage, but a disgrace. However, Sasuke was not spoiled. His father was very strict with him, but his mother Mikoto Iha was a very kind woman and beautiful. Naruto, swinging on a swing near the academy, once saw her in the window of one of the classrooms. It seemed to be a parent-teacher conference that Ia organized to inform parents about their children's progress. It seems that then Sasuke's mother also saw Naruto sadly and completely alone sitting on a swing, and she even seemed to smile at him. Although Uzumaki thought that he was imagining it, no one ever smiled at him unless Old Man Third, and even then rarely Naruto. The nails suddenly growled, breaking the boy out of his thoughts. Get out of here now, I have a presentiment of something terrible. The boy stopped, looking around in bewilderment. It was such that Karam sometimes warned him of danger in the form of nearby residents who in principle could lash out at the unloved incarnation of in the village, but now the streets were empty. He was the only one roaming the dark alleys. It seems your instincts are letting you down, Uzum. Aki grinned, continuing his path and turning the corner. The next moment he stopped in place as if he had turned into a pillar dug into the ground. The boy was horrified. What he saw was imprinted in his memory for the rest of his life, and our hero saw the following: the main street of the Iha quarter as littered with corpses lying in pools of blood that had soaked the sand. Everything around was painted in red tones. There were kunai and shuriken sticking out of the fences and walls of houses. They were lying right on the ground. Some bodies could not be called whole, for example a plump man pinned to the ground with a katana whose head, which now existed in the form of a separate object. Naruto almost tripped over, fixing his gaze on the headless ACH. Naruto began to breathe rapidly. Too often he began to choke on air. He looked up, seeing the corpse of a woman in a semi-sitting position, resting her back on the fence. There was a wound, or even a hole in her stomach, from which almost all the insides fell out. Following her, an old man lying on the sand with his stomach down came into the boy's field of vision. A kunai handle protruded from the back of his head. The head was turned so that Naruto could see the grimace of horror frozen on the victim's face before he looked away. Get out of here, the fox barked. Alive, Naruto took a few hesitant steps back but stopped before running away. His legs didn't obey him, and the noble heart ordered to do otherwise. Despite all the obvious buts, Sasuke, is it real? Lead him to. The boy squeezed out, feeling that he was about to go deaf from the beating of his own heart. He no longer heard the commands that Kurama gave him. Overcoming his fear, the Uzumaki rushed forward, jumping over the corpses of the finished-off members of the Iha clan. He didn't even bother to arm himself with any of the weapons lying around here and there. Without remembering himself, Naruto burst into Sasuke's house, the doors of which were knocked down, and hearing a heartbreaking scream rushed up the stairs. When he burst onto the second floor, he saw a shadow dissolving in the open window. Its red eyes flashing. A man in a new uniform could be discerned in the blurry outlines before he disappeared. The stranger managed to cast a slightly surprised glance at Naruto. However, the appearance of Uzumaki did not interfere with the killer and his plans, and if Naruto had appeared a couple of seconds earlier, it would hardly have changed anything. Sasuke, untouched by the killer, lay on the threshold, twitching in convulsions as the nin tale suggested he was under a powerful jinjutsu. Before bending over the Naruto fixed his gaze on the room in the middle of which the parents of the young Iha were lying in a pool of blood. Sasuke's father was also missing, his head which had rolled somewhere into a corner, leaving a bloody trail behind it, and the Aia's mother was lying on the floor with a tanto sticking out of her back, and it seems she was still twitching barely noticeably. Yes, it was her, the same kind and beautiful woman that Naruto had once seen at the academy. His heart sank and his hand trembled, and a playing card fell from it to the floor. Before Naruto could understand anything, a bright flash of light blinded him, an unknown force which caused cracks to appear in the walls and floor. Through Uzumaki back and painfully pressed the back of his head against the wall. The last thing Naruto heard, since he could no longer see, was a crash and a deafening roar. I finally came to my senses, smiled the third, whom Naruto saw immediately after opening his eyes. How are you feeling, Naruto? The Genu listened to his feelings, among which to his surprise there was no pain. He pulled himself up on the cot and sat down, leaning back on the pillow. Looking around in surprise, Naruto realized that he was in the Koha hospital. He was not alone in the room. Sasuke was lying on the next bed. He didn't look good. This probably why he was given in for. Now the young Iha was unconscious. The third Hokage, an old man in the traditional clothes of the head of the village, his ceremonial suit though without a hat, sat in a chair near his bed, twirling a familiar deck of cards in his hands. What happened? Uzumaki squeezed I don't seem to remember anything, only blood and bodies. A terrible thing happened and I'm really sorry that you and Sasuke were there when it happened, the HA muttered, the smile fading from his face. The Iha clan has been exterminated. Sasuke's parents are dead. What's up? There's nothing left. End of his house. Naruto shuddered, feeling the horror of what was happening. No one survived at all. He squeezed out, well, only Sasuke and Surat. Toy looked back at the half-open door behind which he could see a bench standing in the corridor. Naruto looked there and saw that a girl about the same age as Naruto and Sasuke was sitting on the bench. Her long hair was tied into a ponytail with an elastic band. The stranger was wearing a gray dress and sandals. Lowering her head, she glared at the floor with a doomed gaze. Her legs moved barely noticeably, dangling in the air. Naruto knew when this happened. He himself did this when he believed that everything was lost and cruel life had no meaning. Her name is Mikoto, the only thing she remembers. Horizon muttered, looking thoughtfully at Naruto. Amazing, just like Sasuke's mother. Common name Uzumaki suggested. Maybe. Did you know that Sasuke was named after my Ather nodded. The third, the blonde, shook his head. How is she? Uzumaki asked, looking again through the opening through which poor Mikoto could be seen safe and unharmed. Unlike both of you, responded the third, but as I said, she has complete memory loss. He only remembers his name. However, maybe it's for better. I wouldn't want to remember that. Now she is waiting for Sasuke to come to his senses. After all, they were the last surviving Iha. Although there were many people in this clan, they were unlikely to know each other personally. He cast a sympathetic glance at Sasuke, who barely winced. Maybe Sasuke will forget some details, the HOK muttered. I really hope so. His gaze returned to Naruto. The old man showed him a deck of cards in his hand. I've been looking for her for a long time, he said. It was in your pocket. Yes, I somehow accidentally found it in the academy storage room when Iris-sensei made me repaint the wall I had painted, he squeezed out, trying to sound as convincing as possible. The old man smiled mysteriously. So that's where she got into? Well, okay, keep it for yourself. True, there's one card missing, he said, putting the deck on the cabinet next to the blonde's bed. It will be something have fun with, and tomorrow you will be discharged. Old man. Third, can you teach me how to play? Naruto asked, realizing that he didn't want the old man to leave and leave him alone with an unconscious Sasuke and a room with absolutely nothing to do. Well, so be it. Heram agreed. I'll teach you all the me's that I know myself. Who knows, maybe when Sasuke comes to his senses you will come and play with him. I think he will need a friend in such a difficult time. Naruto remembered how unfriendly Sasuke was with him before the incident, and assuming that after the experience he would have even less daisy to communicate with anyone, especially with him. He answered doubtfully. It's unlikely. The spacious office, illuminated by rays of light penetrating through the windows, was filled with noise of all kinds. It was the chatter and giggle of the girls sitting at the front desks, the trampling of the feet of the boys chasing each other at the blackboard, their cheerful cries, the rustling of textbook pages coming from those few who decided to brush up on the material from the previous lecture. During this break, added to the other sounds, was a disappointed sigh from a boy with long dark hair tied in a ponytail on top of his head, making his hair look like a pineapple. The boy closed his eyes for a moment. His face showed his attempts to think of a way out of this situation, but in the end he had no choice but to give up. And then Nara took the cards laid out on the desk in front of him, and Hero, whose hands were now empty, clapped his hands contentedly, after which he collected the cards into a deck and began to shuffle it once again. I'm a fool, Shamro muttered, looking thoughtfully at his playing partner, a blonde boy in black trousers and a dark gray t-shirt with a red Koha symbol on the chest. Nara thoughtfully watched the cards move in the hands of the surprisingly successful player. He noticed that Naro had changed. Of course, for everyone around him he continued to remain the same as he was, the boy whom everyone shunned, the one about whom adults whispered a lot of disapproval to his classmates. Naruto remained a fool, not excelling in either theoretical subjects or ninjutsu and jinjutsu lessons. However, Shikamaru, who is attentive to detail, noticed that Uzumaki became less talkative and more gloomy, that his tastes in clothes had changed, and Naruto never wore his previously favorite orange color again that the boy began to fool around less and there were no more antics like putting a button on Ia's chair, painting the Hokage monument and the like, and also this strange love for cards that Naruto could beat even him at. All these changes did not happen by chance and Shikamaru understood this. The events that Naruto witnessed left their mark, forcing him to look at the world in a new way and grow up. Although almost no one had noticed this yet, 2 months have passed since that terrible incident in the Iha quarter, which everyone was afraid to mention. Sasuke, having finally recovered from what he had suffered, was now sitting by the window staring gloomily at it and clasping his hands. This is exactly what the boy did all the time between classes. You would have thought that what happened had broken him, but this was not the case since Sasuke was still the first in the class. In terms of academic performance, his grades and rating even increased slightly, and not because the sympathetic Ia could inflate the scores. The Iha worked with even greater zeal, either trying to prove something to someone or pursuing some other goal that no one knew anything about. Shikura turned his gaze to Ino and Sakura, who were sitting on the other side of the first row, in whose company a new academy student, fit in very well, who by a strange coincidence appeared just after what happened in the Iha quarter. At first Mikoto felt very insecure around people she didn't know, and this was not only the case at the academy. Nara heard that after the incident the Iha completely lost her memory. The village itself seemed foreign to her. She had no friends or acquaintances here, as if before the incident with the Iha clan the girl had never left her native quarter and had not communicated with anyone. Now everyone who cared about Mikoto was dead, but that didn't stop her from filling the void by making many friends. The AA was cheerful, kind and sympathetic. Her smile alone made anyone smile back. The only one to whom this did not apply was Sasuke, who for some reason avoided the only surviving Iha. Besides him there was a rustling noise nearby. It was Choji, who had been closely following Naruto and Shikamaru's game, who opened a new bag of chips. I can't believe my eyes. Shikamaru, you lost again, the fat man commented on this. It's a shame. Perhaps. Kaba grinned from his place in the back rows, lying on his desk with a bored look, placing his hands under his chin. The little dog, who had managed to fall asleep on his head, raised his ear but then lowered it again. Shino and Hinata, who were sitting on Kaba's side, said nothing. Naruto smiled, raising his satisfied blue eyes. He was happy that he won again, and that he was able to attract the attention of so many spectators. The Uzumaki stopped shuffling the cards and placed the deck on the table. Maybe we can play shogi, Shikura suggested, ignoring Inosuke's question. Better to play poker. Good game, by the way. 2 players will not be enough. Join us, guys. No wing that Shikamaru has no equal in shogi and that it is useless to compete with him. Naruto refused, looking questioningly at Choji, then looking back at Kba, but as soon as Uzumaki addressed them, Akamichi and Inuzuka turned away, demonstrating a complete lack of desire to communicate with him. The blonde sighed, knowing that this was not without reason. Surely the parents forbade the children to talk to Naruto, threatening them with some kind of punishment. Here we go again, and all because of you, he thought, turning to Kurorama. The Ninetale snorted in irritation in his subconscious. Better behalf. Why, that you were able to find at least one friend at all, growled the fox. It seems that this Shikamaru is the only one who wants to talk to you. The Uzumaki knew that QB was right. Shishimaru was truly the only one with whom Nar managed to establish communication. This reflected either his indifference to the demands of his parents or their general interest in games. Naruto also looked at Sasuke, who was sitting near the window in gloomy thoughtfulness, but he never visited the Iha in the hospital. However, even if he had done this, he would probably have sent him to, as he did with everyone who tried to talk to him about something not related to studies. He glanced at Mikoto, who joined Ino and Sakura's laughter. Apparently the girls were joking about something again, about something that he probably isn't interested in. The Uzumaki gazed at the dark-haired girl, feeling some strange warmth in his stomach. He felt uncomfortable and turned away. The moment has passed. She has already found company. It is unlikely that he will be able to interest her in anything after the incident. Naruto did not say a word to Mikoto, which he now greatly regretted. Perhaps she needed his support. It was needed, but is no longer. Needed Uzumaki didn't know if he had done the right thing by cutting himself off from the last of his kind Iha, but he knew why he did what he did. He did not want to remember those terrible scenes that provoked him to strange and sometimes cruel thoughts. The door creaked and Ia walked into the class room with some papers in his hands. The first person he noticed was Naruto. Naruto, well, put away the cards. Do you know that gambling is prohibited at the academy? Yumo exclaimed indignantly. The Genu rolled his eyes and hurried to put the deck in his pocket before the teacher took it away. A new lesson as starting and the coming day promised to be boring and uninteresting. However, as always, our hero walked along a street immersed in evening darkness. Why is he walking at such a late hour? Nobody knew the answer. Naruto had already become a habit of this. In fact, it was like that for the first 2 weeks. After the nightmare, Uzumaki was terribly afraid of the dark. She awakened panic in him. He could see blood stains in the shadows and sometimes looking at the window behind which the starry sky glittered. Naruto saw that shadow with red lights instead of eyes. For a long time he could not sleep. The lights off. He always carried a flashlight with him. Everything continued until the Ninette Tails, who was both sorry and disgusted at watching his Gentoo, told him that he couldn't live in fear. To overcome his fear, instead of relaxing at home in the evenings, Uzumaki was forced to go outside. At first, he could only take a few steps from his own door and then flying back into the apartment. For a long time he could not stop trembling in his legs and arms. A few days later he was able to walk to the end of the street without even thinking about rushing home. Well, then Naruto fell in love with evening walks, finding their charm in them. The illusions left our hero, allowing him to live in peace, and from now on he liked to wander in the dark. In the light of the sun the world seemed too bright and saturated, which did not fit with the boy's boring and joyless life. Well, in the evening, when everything was painted in dark colors, it seemed to Naruto that the world was coming into harmony. He was never in a hurry. No one was waiting for him at home anyway. He walked leisurely along deserted alleys so as not to run into anyone, and now the Gentoo was wandering along one of these alleys, listening to the sheer ping of grasshoppers, the howling of the wind, and the rustling of leaves. As he walked past A's that were still open, he could smell the aroma of freshly baked goods. However, Naruto never went inside. Firstly, he was wary of how he might be greeted inside, and secondly, he didn't have enough money to buy a thing more expensive than custard noodles at Oraku. He stopped when, in the light of the lantern, he saw a sheet of paper nailed to the notice board. On it was a pencil portrait of some person and some kind of inscription. The Uzumaki knew that it was probably some criminal from some nearby village. There, on the run or wanted. He saw many such advertisements, but they disappeared as quickly as they appeared. Still, the Koha shinobi who set out to capture such individuals did an excellent job. He didn't bother to read it, walking past and thinking about why there was so much bad in this world. The boyo thought about this. After the track tragedy he experienced, bad things were present in every person's life to a greater or lesser extent. It often bypassed some people. Someone was being pursued like a wolf, following the tracks of a wounded victim. Uzumaki remembered with horror what he saw that bloody night and asked himself the question of what kind of person is capable of this and why people do such things. Why are there criminals, murderers, rapists? Why aren't all people kind? Having reached the end of the street that turned into the path leading to the park, Naruto stopped again, thinking it was already late and it was time for him to return home since he had to get up early tomorrow. But the boy really wanted to walk to the lake on the shore of which Sasuke sometimes sat on weekends. The Iha could spend the whole day sitting on the bridge and looking into the water rippling in wind. Coming to the park in the evening, Naruto watched him walk away with a curious look and then replaced him in this post. Uzumaki came to the lake on weekday evenings. It became sort of his favorite place. What can you see in the water during the day? It is not clean and transparent enough to see bottom except perhaps your own blurry reflection and sunbeams dancing across the undulating surface. In the evening it's a different matter. One might think that as darkness sets in there are fewer opportunities for observation. Uzumaki could not agree with this. Even if your own reflection in the water Is already difficult to discern even if the darkness makes it difficult to see the opposite shore, but the lack of clear details just adds to the mystery that so attracted the boy. He liked to peer into the reflection of the starry sky, which very rarely froze completely, copying the original more of 10 than not. The reflection moved, and then you had to take your eyes off the water and look up to connect one luminous point in the sky with another dancing on the small waves. He loved to listen to the quiet ggle and try to distinguish in the darkness the circles moving on the water from the fish erging for air in daylight. This was no problem. Well, in the evening this activity was much more difficult and therefore exciting. Sometimes Naruto peered into the reeds on the opposite bank, wondering what kind of bird would fly into the sky under the cover of darkness if disturbed by the strong wind. Here in general it was in such a world of amazing mysteries that Uzumaki Naruto spent his evenings. At this time the Ninette Tails was already snoring peacefully in his subconscious without bothering him with advice and reproaches at this time, and in this place the boy felt the peace that he so lacked. And now the boy sat down on the edge of the bridge, dangling his legs and dangling them, looking at the small waves dancing on the water, merging in an amazing range of shadows. He was lost in the moment and didn't know how long he spent here when he finally decided to go home. Getting up, Naruto walked back a different way, immersed in thoughts about what tomorrow had in store for him. He was distracted by some sounds coming from the other end of the park. It was screams, as if someone was calling someone. Naruto became wary, trying to figure out whose name was being shouted. Did someone really manage to get lost in the park at night? Even he, a little boy, knew him like the back of his hand. The fleeting thought that they were looking for him instantly left his mind. Who and why on earth would look for him? Nobody needs him. Uzumaki took this path so as not to inadvertently collide with the seekers. Significantly shortening his route through a small undergrowth. True, the undergrowth turned out to be so impassable that the boy had to reconsider his route again and make several detours. He stopped, crouching to listen to the incessant calls that became a little louder. The boy shuddered when he heard an extraneous sound very close by. It was a crash, like someone had stepped on a branch, and something reminiscent of a moo or groan, only very quiet, or someone deliberately interrupted. Then something like a squelching or gurgling sound. The Jinshui jumped to his feet, leaning his back against the nearest trunk, and then as quietly as he could he moved on, moving from tree to tree. He held his breath, realizing that there was someone very close, peeking out from behind a tree. Naruto froze when he saw a bald man with several cross-shaped scars on his head, wearing a standard shinobi uniform, dark blue pants and a turtleneck with a green military vest with many pockets. The stranger was kneeling with his back to the boy, leaning on someone pinned to the ground and moving his pelvis. Someone pinned to the ground could not call for help, since the rapist had his palm over the mouth of his victim, who could only moan quietly while the shinobi burst into her with sharp movements. The Uzumaki felt his heart beat faster in his chest when he realized that the stranger's victim was much smaller than him, that it was a little girl. He didn't know what to do. A noble attempt to intervene was probably the last thing on Nudo mind. What could he, a little boy who had not even become a Jonin, do against an adult shinobi? Surely if he notices him he will kill him. The option to shout loudly and call for help was no longer available, since help was unlikely to arrive on time. The only thing that could be done was to run away, hide. However, Naruto's conscience and what he saw next did not allow him to do this. He noticed red rags lying on the grass right below him, which had once been a dress that was painfully familiar. Feeling a trembling in his hands, the Uzumaki looked up. His foot involuntarily moved back, and a branch cracked under the sole of his sandal. The shinobi frozen looked back and saw a boy who was watching the terrible spectacle in horror. Naruto in turn saw Sakura naked and dirty, covered in bruises and abrasions, being pinned to the ground by a stranger. There were tears on her face that continued to flow from her eyes. The unfamiliar shinobi's palm slipped from the girl's mouth and she screamed. However, this scream ended faster than expected, as the shinobi grabbed a knife lying on the ground and quickly drew the blade across Haruno's throat, standing up and quickly pulling up his trousers. Shinobi moved towards Naruto staring at the naked girl choking on her own blood, did not immediately realize that it was time to run. Belatedly realizing that the killer was about to deal with him, Naruto took an uncertain step back and tripping over a branch fell to the ground. The shinobi rushed towards him, raising the bloody knife to strike. The boy's trembling hand frantically dived into his pocket, pulling out several cards. The Uzumaki formed a concentration seal with his free hand and threw them at the enemy like shurikens. To the rapist's surprise, the edges of the cards flying towards him glowed purple, sharpening as they flew. He jumped to the side trying to dodge the blow. Two cards stuck at the corners into his vest without wounding him, and one struck his cheek leaving a long scratch on it. The other two or three flew further, stuck in tree trunks. Taking advantage of the enemy's confusion, the boy began to crawl back, but his back rested against a stump that appeared on the way. Just at that moment, the shinobi, who had come to his senses, grabbed the knife with a reverse grip and rushed at the boy, intending to finish him off with one blow, but not noticing her, he tripped on the same branch that knocked Naruto to the ground and fell, dropping the knife, which rolled away straight to Naruto. The boy, in whose eyes the terrible scenes of the dismembered members of the Iha clan flashed again, to which was also added Sakura with her throat cut, choking on her own blood, rushed forward like lightning, holding his breath, and grabbed the knife, staining the handle with Haruno's still warm blood. With shaking hands, he pointed his weapon at the nearly risen villain, who looked at him with mockery. "What, are you going to kill me, little one? I don't have enough spirit." Naruto exhaled quickly, as if someone had knocked all the air out of his lungs with a blow, then inhaled just as quickly, feeling the same incomprehensible smell as then in the Iha quarter. It was a smell the boy had never smelled before, not even after cutting himself or breaking his knee when blood appeared. No, it wasn't the smell of blood, more like the smell of murder. Before the shinobi could get to his feet, Naruto flew at him with a desperate cry, knocking him to the ground again, but this time on his back. The first blow was unusually strong for a boy of his age, the blade reflecting the light of the moon. With a second GLA pierced the enemy's chest between the ribs, piercing the vest. The shinobi wanted to scream, but like Sakura, he could not, because his scream was cut off at the initial note. This knife again pierced the flesh, this time to the very hilt, hitting right in the heart, but Uzumaki could not stop, even realizing that the enemy was already dead. He dealt more and more blows, making holes in the rapist like a sieve and splashing out on him all the anger and rage seething in him. He beat again and again, feeling that his face, hands and clothes were all covered in blood, and did not stop until the piercing rays of the lanterns appeared somewhere very close. Dropping the knife, Naruto pulled back, looking in horror at what he had done. "Naruto!" Ia exclaimed, being the first to break through the branches towards him and freezing at the sight of the terrible picture. "I didn't mean to." Uzumaki squeezed out, falling to his knees and feeling his eyes wet with tears. "He killed Sakura." Yumo directed the light to where Sakura's already motionless body lay and dropped the lantern, "and he did terrible things to her. He wanted to kill me too." Uzumaki sobbed, having come to his senses. The teacher came out of his stupor and walked past the corpse of the rapist, whose face was an exact copy of the portrait of an escaped pedophile prisoner from a neighboring village, which could be seen on the advertisements. He sat down opposite Naruto. "Turn away, don't look there," Ia ordered sharply, and when Uzumaki carried out his order, he continued more softly, "You are not guilty of anything." Yumo held the sobbing boy close to him. "That got what he deserved," he muttered, closing his eyes at the number of wounds inflicted on the killer. "You did everything right." Ia shouts rang out from the edge of the undergrowth. The Chunin looked back, realizing that he had become too separated from the other people who were looking for Sakura, who had run away from home after a quarrel with her parents. He knew that nothing could be fixed and that it would be impossible to delay the inevitable. The girl was dead, and her parents would still find out about it a minute earlier. A minute later, "We are here," Yumo shouted and said. "Don't be afraid, these are Sakura's parents and the search patrol." Everything was behind, but Naruto knew that nothing was behind him. It was another nightmare he would never forget, and this time Koha found itself in the darkness of night, but to the darkness that thickened over the village, not allowing anyone to think about anything good. After what happened in the park was added a strong wind that rushed through the streets, lifting fallen leaves into the air and rolling a bottle along the ground, which someone was too lazy to Throw in the trash. It did not subside for a moment, continuing to buzz annoyingly and sometimes shake the windows, crashing into the glass with all its unbridled power. At such moments our hero shuddered and, pulling the blanket more tightly over himself, turned over to the other side. This night turned into eternity for the boy. Tossing and turning in bed, he could not sleep. Closing his eyes and opening them again, he again saw in front of him a man whom he had stabbed many times. No, he was no longer afraid, and the horror of what he had done had long passed, and Naruto was ready to admit that he did not feel a bit sorry for the man he had killed. Ia informed him that the rapist was from the Hidden Grass village, and in his homeland he managed to commit many similar crimes. On his account were several murdered children whom he abused in an even more terrible way. A house with a family of people who had offended the criminal in some way burned in it, as well as compatriots whom the Nook Nen wanted in all countries. Vy dealt with by stabbing them in the back with a knife. This shinobi ended up in the Hidden Leaf village recently, judging by the body of a chunin found that evening from whom the killer rode the Koha uniform and protector. One way or another, the Nook Mean was now dead and no longer a threat to anyone. Not wanting Naruto to see Sakura's parents agonizing over their daughter's body, much less to be questioned by other members of the search party about what had happened, Yumo quickly took him home, telling the boy to come to his senses. He even suggested that he not attend the academy until Uzumaki felt stronger. Left alone with himself, Naruto quickly got rid of his blood-stained clothes, took a shower, watching the water mixed with blood disappear into the drain hole, looked into the refrigerator but felt that it would be a while before he could eat anything, and lay down in bed. He had been there for the last couple of hours. Stop tormenting yourself with pointless attempts to fall asleep, the fox growled in his subconscious. It would be better to do something useful. Oh, you slept well. With this, Kurorama Uzumaki hissed, abruptly turning over on his other side and staring at the wall. He felt resentment towards the Ninette Tails. The fox always helped him in difficult situations, telling him what to do in this or that case. If he had listened to his advice on the day when the Iha clan was exterminated, then perhaps he would not have witnessed all the terrible things that turned his idea of life upside down. So why didn't the demon warn him this time? I didn't sleep, Q admitted. I just wanted to see what you could do without my help. If I had intervened in this matter, everything could have ended much worse. Sakura is dead, the Jin Shariki exclaimed, clenching his fist. The image of the girl to whom he would never tell about what he felt for her from the very first sight again appeared before his eyes. Maybe it's better this way, Kurorama responded with complete indifference in his voice. I don't think she would have recovered from that. She probably would have committed suicide in a couple of weeks. How can you be such an indifferent brute? Naruto jumped out of bed and, unable to contain his anger, punched the wall. I thought we were friends. We are not friends, the Ninettles barked, causing the Uzumaki, who gritted his teeth in pain, to wince. Remember what I told you about your parents? It's me. I killed them. I ruined your life. It's because of me that everyone hates you. Naruto took a deep breath, calming down, and sat back down on the edge of the bed. I know you are, Uzumaki answered, and oh no, that it was not of my own free will, but one way or another you are the only one I have, and for that I am grateful to you. Fool, growled the fox, sitting in the cage and looking thoughtfully through the bars at the flooded floor. He bared his teeth in a smile that Naruto had almost never seen there. He was still something he kept secret from Naruto, the whole truth that Kurorama revealed to the young Uzumaki the first time he was able to contact him. He did not tell out of the kindness of his heart. The Ninette Tails hoped that the boy would lose his mind with rage break, or at least weaken the Sela. NDEQ would be free again, but this did not happen, and during all the time that Kurorama spent with Naruto, he became a little attached to his Gentry Alf, though he was not going to tell him about it. You have something that many people lack, something that Sakura lacked. In order to survive, you have proven that you can fight for your life, Kurorama continued. The card trick was very impressive, and my accuracy was better than in the Kai and Shuriken throwing lessons. Naruto looked down at the deck that lay on the nightstand to the side of the bed. Now it was missing not one but 7 cards, but it would be better if you tried to seal the techniques into them again. This time you were lucky that the enemy stumbled, but in the future this is unlikely to happen again, and what you can do may not be enough, Kurorama added. Besides, do you want to take the Janine exam? The Uzumaki nodded, knowing that there Was no need to answer this question verbally because the answer was already obvious. Then start right now, he heard the fox's voice. What? Yes, I only know one technique, sealing, and even then I'm not completely sure whether it works or not, the blonde exclaimed with slight indignation. Then I will teach you one technique, only one that even you can do. We'll use it to check whether Mio's sealing technique works correctly. The fox growled, displeased, hearing that Kurarama would personally teach him some technique which was simply incredibly cool. Naruto hurriedly got up, quickly made his bed and got dressed. Then the Genu and his Bu began their first joint training. Naturally, both were so engrossed in what they were doing that they did not notice a shinobi in an AMU mask watching the boy actions through an open window sitting on a nearby roof. And finally, in the morning, the training bore fruit. Naruto was able to successfully perform the technique by forming the seals, but having sealed it into a card and used it, I was convinced that it was much simpler taking the 7-cross. Naruto made a seal of concentration with his free hand, the blonde said. Shadow cloning technique. Several pops were heard in the room and 4 exact copies of him appeared from the puffs of white smoke around the pleased Uzumaki. The Jinchuriki was beside himself with happiness. I can't believe it, he whispered, thinking that even ordinary user clone Loing had always been the most difficult for him. The boy flinched from an unexpected knock on the door. At his mental command, all the shadow clones dispersed, slowly approaching the door and wondering who could be behind it. Naruto pulled the handle towards himself. He expected to see the third Hokage there, who decided to visit the boy to check how he was coping, but no. On the threshold stood another old man in black and white robes of a much less pleasant appearance. He had short hair that rose up and fell back over his forehead over a white bandage that was pulled around his head several times and hit half of his face, particularly his right eye. The old man's chin was decorated with a cross-shaped scar. At the sight of the boy on the threshold, his left eye opened slightly and glanced at the young man with a cold gaze. Uzumaki. Naruto, I presume, said the shinobi. The Genu hesitated and nodded. And who will you be, old man? My name is Shimura Danzo. I am the head of the Bu route, the ninja said, and Uzumaki shuddered again with awkwardness. He did not address a person of such high rank very politely, and if the good-natured third could forgive Naruto such antics and had long ago turned a blind eye to them, then this man would not have tolerated such an attitude as was demonstrated by his stony face. Sorry, Naruto muttered uncertainly. Leadin, get acquainted. Shimura nodded curtly. Can I come in? He asked, also rather out of decency, since he knew that he would not receive a negative answer. Leaning on his cane, he walked inside and, stopping in the center of the room, took an appraising look at the chaos reigning in Nuts Abad. The boy hurried to close the door behind him and turned to the uninvited guest. Something told him that it was better not to turn his back on him. It was Kurarama, who was so surprised by Danzo's visit that he did not immediately warn the Jinchuriki. Naruto, be careful with this man. I've heard a lot about your successes, said the head of the route. Naruto thought, and remembering that at the academy he had not distinguished himself in anything other than poor academic performance, he realized that the old man with bandages on his face knew about what happened yesterday and meant exactly what happened. Koha owes you, Naruto. This man will no longer harm anyone, Danzo continued, confirming the boy's fears. Believe me, many already know about what you did. Rumors spread quickly in Koha, but alas, not all of them will be grateful to you for what you have done. What do you mean? Uzumaki asked cautiously, not understanding what the old man was driving at. As many already know you committed murder, and considering what they are already saying about you, this is not the best thing to do. Perhaps people will treat you even worse, Shimura explained, so I think you need my help. Naruto remained silent, waiting for the head of the route to continue. And I need your talents. Do you want to become a route ninja, serve light and order from the shadows, and save the world from monsters like that killer as expected? Danzo did not hesitate to continue his thought. P.S. Naruto muttered uncertainly, and immediately a growl was heard in his head. Bad idea. Then the route is what you need. I am aware that you have problems with techniques, but you have a talent for extraordinary use of cards in battle. At the route they will prepare you for anything and make you a first CL. Asked Shinobi Shimura said, noticing that Naruto was doubtful. He frowned, realizing that it might not have been possible without the fox's intervention. I think I'm not ready yet, Uzumaki drawled, looking away and feeling the shivers running down his spine from every glance of the old man. I haven't even graduated from the academy yet. It's not a problem. The root program includes an accelerated academy course. Besides, I heard Ia excused you from class, Shimura replied, putting Nar in a difficult position. I think very soon you will notice how people will treat you. There will be even more hateful looks and whispers behind your back. In the root, no one will judge you for what you have done. You will forever get rid of those who interfere with your life. Your social circle will include only a few people whom you can completely trust. He should be advertising the new ramen in Ichiraku, the fox growled, noting that if Danzo's voice hadn't sounded so ominous, his speech would have immediately forced Naruto to respond positively to the offer. Naruto, Danzo is a respected person in Koha and everyone believes him, but your mother was sure that he was involved in dark affairs. Besides, I heard that the root is an organization after which shinobi become obedient puppets. Deprived emotions. Do you really want this? I intend to return to the academy today, Naruto said unexpectedly sharply, and I don't care what they say about me. The main thing is that they don't consider me a coward, as they certainly will if I suddenly disappear. Eye sparkles flashed in Danzo's eye. Aren't you afraid? Don't you feel afraid after what you went through? He asked, intending to say that serving in the root would help Naruto completely eradicate fear from himself. No, Naruto replied. Commendable, Shimura said, and slowly moved towards the door, leaning on his cane. But think again about my proposal, it remains valid. The old man walked away, leaving Naruto to follow him with a thoughtful gaze. Is it true what you said about the academy? Kurorama was surprised when the old man reached the end of the street and turned the corner. I thought you'd be glad to take a week or two off. Yes, really, I'm not going to show my weakness to anyone, and I don't care what they say about me. What's the point of hiding from this if they'll talk about the same thing in my absence? Naruto answered mentally, and grabbing a deck of cards from the cabinet left the apartment. Squinting a little from the morning sun. Very soon he reached the academy, not noticing much difference from the way passers-by stared at him now and before. When the Jinchiki entered the audience, the guys who were making noise as they usually did fell silent. Many eyes turned to the Uzumaki. Lord H. He's going to kill us, someone exclaimed with faint horror. Several people could not contain their laughter after this shout. Hey crazy, are you going to stab us or wait until we get raped? The boy, looking at them with an indifferent glance, moved to his place next to Shikamaru, who seemed to be the only one looking at him with some kind of sympathy. Along the way, Naruto noticed that even Sasuke, who was gloomily staring out the window, deigned to look at him. There was contempt in his gaze, but not the same as before, which the Iha felt for the Jinchuriki, considering his antics the height of idiocy, but so nothing else. Maybe it was some kind of reproach for what Naruto had done. The Uzumaki could not know what was going on in the AIA's head, but he realized that it was very likely, since after experiencing the massacre of his own family, Sasuke was unlikely to admire such cruelty as the many merciless wounds that turned someone into a sieve. He probably thought Naruto was crazy now too. This means that the third's idea to make Naruto and Sasuke friends has now become simply impossible. The Iha turned away and the blonde saw Sakura's empty seat next to him, Ino and Mikoto sitting next in the front row and arguing about something became silent when Uzumaki walked through the opening between the desks. Climbing the steps. Stop, Mikoto, he heard Yamanaka's voice, and the next moment he felt someone carefully take his hand. Turning and seeing a dark-haired girl standing up, a question in her eyes, he froze. Naruto, Sakura, I couldn't do anything, it was too late, I'm sorry, Uzumaki answered, and when Mikoto let him go, silently nodded and sat back down. He went on sitting down. The guy turned to Shikamaru. If you have questions, ask, he suggested to his friend indifferently. It's not worth it, Naru responded, putting his hand in his pocket and taking out a deck of cards, brand new, of 54 cards. Apparently Shikamaru was well prepared to take revenge and make sure that Naruto played honestly. Maybe we'd better play before Ia-sensei comes. 6 months have passed. Much has changed in Naruto's life during this time. Danzo had predicted the villagers' attitude towards him only worsened. There were several cases when he had to run away not from peers of Goer appearance but from adults who did not want a demon and murderer to walk along their streets and pose a threat to innocent citizens. However, such a disgusting attitude towards Naruto also had its advantages. He began to train diligently even on the way to the academy and back, taking it either along the rooftops where he honed his jumps and chakra control or along the streets where there was a lot of cover, thus training his stealth skills. After several all these seemingly stupid at first glance activities had their results. Naruto learned to move silently, became good at hiding, and also mastered walking along a sheer wall, along a ceiling, and on flat water. He had not yet been able to balance on the waves, and our hero fell under the water, thereby causing the laughter of Kurorama, who was watching all his training. "You've done well these past 6 months," Kurorama remarked as the Jin Cherokee rushed across the rooftops. Ahead there was an abyss in the form of a street, but Uzumaki did not slow down but rather accelerated, pushing off from the edge. He jumped over 10 and 112 barely visible to the inexperienced of ordinary residents, landing on the roof of a building on the opposite edge of the street. Naruto nodded silently as he continued on his way. It wasn't often that the Ninetales praised his successes over the past time. The arsenal of his own techniques has not been replenished. 2 techniques, sealing and shadow cloning, the latter of which Uzumaki always used with a card, made up his modest reserve. However, he still had the chance to use Mito sealing jutsu again in practice and make sure that it worked flawlessly that day. Naruto followed one of the Chunin team's training, and by the way, they didn't even notice him, which Uzumaki was very proud of. He managed to find the right moment and seal a couple of techniques he saw into cards, and now the Gentry could use these jutsu at any time, resorting to the help of his cards. By the way, EAD of a noticeably thin deck, he now had a new full one, and it wasn't just the techniques that were sealed in the cards. Uzumaki was well prepared for today, and today was a special day. It was the day of assignment to teams after successfully passing the Genin exam. By the way, Naruto passed the exam very easily. He needed to be shown the cloning technique, but the boy demonstrated the shadow cloning technique. Ia was so impressed that he didn't ask Naruto any theoretical questions. Now the blonde proudly wore his own headband with the protector of the village, which he had long dreamed of. He arrived and entering the audience, and as always attracting the gaze of those present, took his place next to Shikamaru. "I was almost late," Nara commented on his arrival, glancing sideways at the clock hanging on the wall. "We had to make final preparations. It took a while," Naruto muttered, patting his pocket. At that moment, Ia entered the audience, and after making a speech about how proud he was of all his students, informed those present that the third had already decided on how to divide them into teams. In his hands was a list approved and certified by the Hokage. "I hope Shikamaru and I are on the same team. After all, he is my only friend," Naruto thought, but the next minute he was disappointed. "Team number 10 Shikar Nara Ino Yamanaka Choji Amy, your captain is Sarutobi Ama Yumo," announced Shikamaru, sighing and casting a farewell glance at Naruto, stood up and together with Choji and Ino left the class, proceeding to the auditorium where the new teacher was waiting for them. Team number 8 Hinata Hyuga Kba Inazuka Shino Abir Era continued, "Your captain Yuhi Rei." Finally, it was our hero's turn to enroll. Team number 7 Sasuke Ai Mikoto Aka Naruto Uzumaki, under the leadership of Kaka Shihadaki Yumo, said, "You stay here." Having read the list to the end and waited until everyone except the trio from the 7th team had left the hall, Ia wished his former students good luck and also left, saying that Kakashi would come soon. There was an awkward silence. Naruto glanced first at Sasuke, wearing dark blue shorts and a turtleneck t-shirt with the clan symbol on the back with a headband on his forehead, looking as sullen as ever, and then at Mikoto, who was wearing dark gray shorts and a black sleeveless t-shirt, the girl's dark hair usually tied in a ponytail or two. She liked to experiment with hairstyles, was now loose and falling over her shoulders. Her protector glittered on her neck, somewhat reminiscent of a collar. It seems that the AA was not at all upset about which team she ended up on. "Is this some kind of joke?" Naruto thought. "Old man third, what were you thinking when you united you into one team great Sasuke muttered with undisguised sarcasm looking at his new teammates. He said this quite quietly, but both Mikoto and Naruto, who was coming down the stairs to sit closer, heard him perfectly. Moto, who was sitting a few seats away from Sasuke in the same row, glanced at him with confusion. Is there something you don't like? It seems to me on the contrary it's good that you and I are on the same team. The last Iha should stick together, she asked. He gave the girl a not very kind look, and Naruto remembered that after the incident in the Iha quarter he deliberately avoided communicating with Mikoto for unclear reasons. You, the one who bears the name of my mother, whose face I can't even remember, and a maniac making a fool of himself. A great team, the AI muttered. Mikoto looked down. Apparently the phrase Sasuke said really hurt her. Sorry, I didn't even know, she said, understanding the Iha always felt a strange dislike for her. Naruto came down to them, sat down on the desk, and crossing his legs looked at Sasuke defiantly. I'm not a maniac. I am not like the one who massacred your clan. Believe it or not, what I did was self-defense, he said calmly, and after a short pause turned exclusively to Sasuke. And not a fool if you think so, more like a joker. Pulling a card from his pocket, he showed Sasuke the black gesture depicted on it. It would be better to learn some techniques, Joker, than to suffer foolishly, Sasuke answered coldly. Turning to the window, Naruto sighed in disappointment, realizing that he would have a hard time with this guy, and looked at Mikoto, noticing her interested look at the map. Can you perform magic tricks, she asked. The Uzumaki thought for a moment, realizing that he had never done a single trick with cards. However, he was so dexterous in handling cards that he could come up with something on the fly. Of course, he answered, taking a playing deck from his pocket and shuffling it. His hands moved faster and faster, drawing Mikoto's attention to him. Then Naruto abruptly grabbed the deck with 2 fingers, pouring a small amount of chakra through them, hit the edge on the desk, and then the cards one by one flying into the air and describing an arc moved towards him into his open palm, again gathering into an even stack. Very, very impressive. Mikoto smiled, not even suspecting that Naruto had just invented this trick. The Uzumaki caught Sasuke's gaze. Hey Sasuke, choose a card. He turned to him, realizing that a new trick was a good way to diffuse the atmosphere. He fanned the cards out to Sasuke, waiting for his answer. I don't play these games, the Iha said indifferently, turning away again. Let me do it then, Mikoto suggested, making Naruto turn to her with a harming smile. She thought for a moment and pointed her finger at one of the cards. The Uzumaki instantly touched the card with his fingernail on the other side, doing it quickly enough so that Mikoto wouldn't notice, and putting the cards into the deck began to shuffle them. The Iha again began to fall out the movements of his hands. Imagine her surprise when one card flew up on its own like a bird escaping from a cage, and Naruto, stopping shuffling the deck, grabbed it with a quick lightning-like movement, holding it between his index and middle fingers. That's her, he asked, and after waiting for a nod, another beautiful smile, and even applause, he added, she's so naughty she always flies away. Mikoto laughed, and meanwhile the gentry checked what kind of card he was holding in his hand. It was the Queen of Hearts. Not a very original choice for a girl, however. Okay, he thought, looking at the girl, burst into laughter, but it wasn't that difficult. Maybe I shouldn't have hesitated so long to talk to her. It couldn't be said that Naruto was an amorous boy. As a child he was always fascinated by Sakura, now asking himself the question of what exactly Uzumaki could not find an answer, probably because of He unusual hair color. Previously he loved things that were bright and stood out against the general background. With her appearance she always attracted his gaze. Uzumaki felt sympathy for Mikoto from her very appearance at the academy. Although he had never really spoken to her, for some reason it seemed to him that they had already met, that perhaps they already knew each other a little. It was not only sympathy but also a kind of lightness in the whole body with every glance of her. However, Nar never thought that he was in love. After the incidents he experienced, he began to doubt that such a beautiful thing as love could exist in such a cruel and disgusting world. Yes, sympathy, attraction, perhaps this is what he could call what he felt for the girl. Well, leadin' be friends, he asked, feeling a little awkward from the question which a few years ago might have seemed the most ordinary, but now for some Reason caused an incomprehensible embarrassment. Of course Mikoto responded, holding out her dainty little hand for Naruto to shake. Is life really getting better? Uzumaki couldn't believe his luck he made a second friend, moreover from his own team. Well, finally, Sasuke muttered, completely ignoring his tea. Amidst directing his gaze towards the door slid aside the next second and a shinobi appeared on the threshold, old in a standard uniform of dark blue trousers and a turtleneck and a military vest, whose face was completely hidden except for one eye by a mask the gen had gray, even almost white hair sticking up. There was also a protector on his forehead which slid slightly to the side and covered his second eye along with his mask. Sorry I'm late, he apologized. I am Hatake Kakashi, captain of your team. As he entered he glanced at the three new students and smiled under his mask. I think it would be nice for me to know your names too. Tell us what you like, what you don't like, what you strive